All right, we should be visible and audible to people on YouTube. Let Kate know in the chat. She's our chat wrangler. If you can, in fact, see and hear us. I can hear myself on Kate's laptop around the corner. So I think we're good. Are we good, Kate? Yes. So you can see and hear us. How many people have we got? 97 right now. 97 people watching live. Say hi in the chat. Talk to each other. How this is going to work, because this is obviously the first time we've done this live. This is the farm, by the way. This isn't. This is Austin. You may recognize him from the internet. How we're going to do this is we're going to do our usual H1 thing. And during the course of the discussion, fire some questions into the chat, and Kate will bundle up the, the ones that are good. Remember, no personal chart questions. And once we're done, seeing what's going to happen in the next 6 months, we will take some Q&As and have that sort of discussion and go from there. But this is exciting. I'm fun.
You're reasonably fun.
All right.
A bit demanding, but fun.
Well, it's a kind of fun, isn't it?
Well, yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is going to be fun. Austin, welcome aboard again.
Thank you. I would say it's good to be back, but this feels like a totally different thing.
This is something else. Yes, for sure. And also, I'd say welcome to the farm, but you'll have been here for a few days. So welcome to the farm. Welcome back.
Thank you.
All right. As we usually do, let's talk about, as we're at the end of the year, talk about 2018, what even happened, and with a particular emphasis on H1. Let's do our review thing. How do you think our discussions went in terms of forecasting and what happened and what were the main beats for you?
Well, like we were saying earlier, the first and second halves of 2018 were distinct. The first half, we were talking about this earlier. I think the first quarter just felt like Saturn in Capricorn introducing itself. I got the most positive Saturn and Capricorn stuff that you're supposed to get then. I was really organized. I was really productive. I not only was disciplined, but I enjoyed the idea of discipline. You're like, ooh, this is great. I'm being good in a way that's pleasing and productive. And then we had Uranus's movement into Taurus during the second quarter. And that was one that was interesting because it was marked by exactly the kind of natural, I don't want to say disaster, but dramatic natural phenomenon that, that you would use as a metaphor for Uranus moving into Taurus. That's always fun. And then, and that was sort of June was sort of, we had Uranus in Taurus and things were setting up for the Mars retrograde. And then the second half of the year, with the Mars retrograde entwined with the eclipse cycle, followed almost immediately by the Venus retrograde and Jupiter and Sag, and now we're here.
Yeah,
it was much more personal and much more chaotic, which is, it's funny because you can say you can pinpoint what times will be more personal and chaotic, but that doesn't make them less that.
Yeah,
and so. Yeah, and so we've gotten here. I feel good about the sort of the way that we discussed or laid out the obstacle course of H2. I think that has worked not only for me, but just about everybody I've talked to about their experience of the last 5 months.
Yeah, that broadly mirrors. As we were kind of obviously prepping what we're going to talk about. I said, for me, in a funny way, 2017 started in May because I think in my head, SatCap, 2018 rather, because SatCap for me is kind of like end of 2017 story. But you're right, the first 4 months of the year, if you were going to lean into that, you got an uninterrupted signal of SatCap, and then things went, and then Uranus did what it does, and really messed with the radio dial. And then H2 for me, because I have this question is, what was the man of the match configuration for 2018? I guess the biggest thing for my thoughts are, for most people it was Venus red in Scorpio, but on a personal basis for me it was Mars red.
So I'm going to go Mars. Because the Mars and Venus cycles were so tightly configured, they They basically occurred 90 degrees away from each other, so they hit a lot of the same things in people's charts. And the Venus retrograde in Scorpio is Venus going retrograde in a Mars-ruled sign right after a Mars retrograde. Right. There's really a follow-on from the Mars to the Venus. I found, and in my client work, that the Mars was more dramatic. The Venus was possibly more transformative. I think there are a lot of things that happened over the Q3 that sunk in and maybe got to some sort of resolution during the Venus in Q4. But those are, I thought at the time, or I thought before the time, and I think especially now afterwards, that it was very much a 1-2 punch. It was the same combination. It was a sequence. One hitting the same angles in people's charts and thematically connected in a lot of ways.
Right. So one of the things we ended the last one on was like basically have your Mars ret, have your Venus ret, and then and Santa comes to town. Now we got Jupiter Sag. Right. So I think that was pretty much the best way to deal with. And I know a lot of people, that's how they're processing. It's like, well, here comes the Mars, here comes the Venus, and everyone kind of knew Jupiter Sag was happening. And I think we're here. And so far, it's early days. So the man of the match in terms of the most potent or intense was Mars ret. But the best of the year we're actually in, aren't we?
I'd hope so.
That's Let's
why
not have it worse.
I mean, I'm flying around the world and being treated to wines and liquors and cigarettes of exotic and delicious varieties. It's been pretty good so far.
So anything left? I mean, one of the good things that we sort of noticed putting the event together and then having the event was there is a increasingly similar language for how we process the big world and the little world amongst astrologers and magicians, so that people there's a learning metabolism increase and also just a general increase in understanding of other people. And that's been one of the things of other people's experiences. And that's been one of the things I've noticed with the premium members and so on this year, as that, particularly from the magic side, we're coming at it as baby astrologers. We're kind of learning, and we're sort of realizing that maybe there are a bit more universal experiences. And so this is a kind of good way to begin talking about 2019. Talk about 2019 we'll start with, is it the same as 2018? Is it, how do we think about next year in relation to what we've just been through? Like, which are the stories that continue to run? And yeah, take it away.
Okay, so 2019 is in some ways a simpler version of 2018, not an easier version, but simpler. And by that, I'm looking at Jupiter, and Jupiter's going to be in Sagittarius until December of 2019. So it's basically an all-year influence. And then Saturn is, of course, still in Capricorn, still going to be in Capricorn for most of 2020, or most of it. And we have because we got them out of the way, there's no Venus retrograde in 2019. There's no Mars retrograde in 2019. When it's the retrograde points where Venus and Mars, should we say, take up space. Did they move slowly and take up space like they're bigger, outer, heavier planets? So they're just going to be cruising for 2019. What we do have is for 2019 is we have an intensification or a doubling down on the Saturn and Capricorn issue, because we have the eclipse cycle is moving to meet Saturn. Right? We had the coincidence of the eclipse cycle and the Mars retrograde last year, or earlier this year. Yeah. But we have the nodes, the lunar nodes, Rahu and Ketu, are moving to, they have just moved into Cancer and Capricorn. And so we have what will be, at least chart visible, a conjunction between the South Node and Saturn. And two, that means that eclipses will occur near Saturn. And so we get a solar eclipse not far from Saturn in January, and then we'll get a lunar in July. And we're actually going to be in that cycle of eclipses synced up with Saturn for about a year and a half. So that's going to take us well into 2020.
Now, when you say it's an intensification of SatCap, like In what sense? Like, what could that hypothetically look like? Give like 2 or 3 examples, either for the world or a person. Or you're welcome to use me, because I'm not going to have a great Jan.
Right. Well, so with the nodes do a lot of things. One of the things that the nodes do is their proper language is shadow, right? They're eclipse points. And so in trying to understand them, if you do it right, you'll always come back to a language that juxtaposes what is clear and visible and what's in the shadow. And that shadow side of things is, what is the show, the demi-monde, right? The shadow world, the half world. And so the nodes reveal, the nodes and the eclipses reveal what is concealed right behind things, and provide little doorways or access points between monde and demi-monde. On a psychological level, that's the difference between the conscious personality and who I think I am, and all the other stuff that's me that doesn't necessarily get play in my own mind, or that I don't recognize happening in in a society that's for example, that could be an underworld, whether it's like a fun countercultural underworld or a criminal underworld versus the sort of law abiding daylight world, right? And so, in a sense, whenever you have eclipses hitting a planet, or you have the nodes, which are the eclipse seeds or triggers, hitting a planet, you get more layers of that planet. And so that South Node Saturn combination is in some traditions of Vedic astrology. It creates 2 yogas, or 2 combinations. It does 2 things that are predictable. One is, it's literally a hungry ghost yoga. And so if we're talking about Saturn, we're talking about what's old, what's past, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes what is dead is not gone. And that if that's in a person's natal chart, they may be especially haunted by ancestral trauma, right? Lineage issues. There's more to sort out. Then it's not, I don't like my mom, or my dad was a dick. It's like great grandpa and back
killed a bunch of Native Americans.
Right. And I'm the one who gets stuck with it in this generation. And so that's really interesting. So that's what that does in a natal chart. Right. And so the world has Preta yoga, for the next year and a half. Like, this is I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about there are a lot of different ways this can work. And actually, before I talk about that, I want to talk about the other yoga that this does. This is also a funeral yoga, where if you had this in your natal chart, then, and there's a couple other conditions for met there, there's a great danger that you will suffer from improperly mourning one of your parents.
Right.
And so this, the complex here is improperly buried, not sufficiently mourned. And the answer isn't, and I think this works with the point in history we're at, it's not like ghost busting, and it's not like, oh, you're causing problems, you go in the containment unit. And it's also not allowing yourself to be fully possessed by the horrors of the past. But there's a really difficult, I think, dialogue that's necessary in order to put a ghost to rest. You need to listen to its story fully before it can move on. But in listening, their stories have a way of possessing people. And so that's kind of dangerous space. That's in some of your work, when you're talking about understanding the history of a land, especially a conquered land, you talked about staying with the trouble. It's very much that Saturn South Node configuration very much says stay with the trouble historically.
Empires could be described as one giant improperly buried mass grave.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about here is, it's not ghost busting. The other way you get rid of ghosts classically is if they have you're listening to the story, and so in that
burying.
And empire is one improperly buried mass grave, and you just need to look around to see that is bubbling up in at least Western unconscious, which is how we acknowledge and frame and remediate and make recompense for how the West in particular has gotten to where it is right now. And that is the story across gender equality. That is the story across everything else. It is we're at that, like, let's look at the fact that we not only improperly buried them, they're in mass graves, metaphoric mass, sometimes literal mass graves, and go, okay, let's get this right. Let's, in the Aboriginal term for it is sorry business. And it's sitting around and acknowledging that bad stuff has happened and processing it. And as you say, hearing the story. And then that's the only way that the ghosts get to stop being ghosts and get to be spirits in the afterlife.
Right. Absolutely. And that that piece would stand on its own during any year where that happened. But it's also, we're also at this point where we're basically 1 year away. We're in literally the last full year before the end of a 200 plus year cycle, the Triplicity cycle. Yeah. And that cycle basically began in 1802. And so that was the land, there was the earth cycle. So it was, though empire is certainly older, the structures that we're dealing with the fallout from, and to a certain degree still shackled by, and also just sort of camping in the haunted wreckage of, that's pretty much all during this last 220 years.
Absolutely.
And so this configuration, which speaks explicitly to burying, reburying, exhuming, exercising, listening, is all the more appropriate. And so in the traditional Vedic astrology, they're not saying anything about Pluto, but Pluto is there with Saturn and the South Node. And Pluto cannot possibly contradict what's implied by just the Saturn. So it's Pluto, right? Like, it's the planet named for the underworld, both the place and the intelligence of the underworld and the dead.
It's beautiful.
So it's kind of a triple down.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and we can only get past empire if the ghosts come back to, like, it would continue otherwise. If the ghosts come back to share their stories so that we hear them, so that we can go, okay, let's never do this again. Like, it's cosmically beautiful that, as you say, it's at the end of the 200-year cycle that we get haunted with the specific consequences.
Yeah, it's all around us when we look. Yeah. And you can see, I don't know, I've been thinking a lot in terms of this sort of like, so last year I wrote about coming into 2018 as sort of coming to explore a mysterious new continent. Like, we've, the ship of humanity has landed in this, this kind of unfamiliar shore. But as we start exploring it, we find that it's haunted, and it's haunted by us. It's not haunted by, some lost civilization. It's actually haunted by, what we thought we were sailing away from. And so that imagery for me lately has been turning into, like, camping in the ruins of empire, but having to salvage tools from it. But those are, was the bell hooks thing. Those are literally the tools that built that house. Yeah. And having you being like, well, I need a hammer, but this hammer keeps making these things, or it's only good for this. And that's a tricky position.
And is that so that was a description for heading into 2018. Does that ship continue to sail, at least at the beginning? And also, just to bring it back to H1, the biggest thing in January specifically is the eclipse Saturn stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so, the stuff is good to, so this is all this Saturn, South Node, Pluto stuff runs for all of 2019 and a good chunk of 2020. And we get introduced to it properly during January. Actually, as soon as the sun goes into Capricorn, right after the solstice, right. Like, we're going to see that. And I think that's only fair because the sun's time in Sagittarius, which we're in right now, has been was the introduction to the Jupiterian component. Right. Right. And
it's a good sequence.
Yeah. And Jupiter is the anything's, especially Jupiter and Sag, is that not anything's possible, but so much more is possible for the world and for you than you are factoring in that it's the anything is possible feeling. They're like, it's like, oh, it could be so much better.
People are wanting a technical definition of the 200-year cycle.
There's not time for that right now.
We'll do it in the Q&A.
And
it is for people who are, Austin and I spoke about that at the beginning of last year, I think.
We talked about it a couple of times.
Yeah. So like, we'll get to it in the Q&A, but yeah.
Actually, let me do a super quick one. So basically, one of the older and sturdier timing methods for looking at history through the lens of astrology is you look at Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. Every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn conjoin. These conjunctions will occur in signs of the same element for 200-ish years. And so you get 800-ish years cycles where it goes through all 4 elements. There's some wobble at the edges, and sometimes it'll be a 220, sometimes it'll be a 180, sometimes 2 cycles will overlap. We've been overlapped for about 40 years.
Yeah.
What we're doing now is we're moving decisively into the air cycle and out of the earth cycle.
And the reason we spoke about it is that wobble, that 40 years is, as far as I can tell, the secret space program. And by the time we get into the next 200 years, where we go literally from the earth into the air, that whether, I mean, I'm right about it, but whether or not there is a secret space program or not, in 200 years time, we will definitively be multiplanetary.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Like it is the story of the next 200 years.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, the story of the last 200 was empire. Picture a map of the British Empire at its peak. That's the story of this cycle. And the story of the next cycle is an actual cosmic fucking map of where the fact that we will be multiplanetary. And that's what for me, and this is why I like the Armstrong stuff as well, the longer cycles will give you the macro narrative that will land at some. The video is down?
Yeah, the video stopped for about a minute.
Is it back on now?
No.